followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to keep in our hearts and prayers the Doug Goodman's family. Doug's an amazing member of the community and will be missed. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you all. Now need a motion for approval of our agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to approve our agenda as presented.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. Any suggestions or changes or questions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And the agenda is carried. Now need approval of the minutes from the workshop and business meeting of August 28th. Is there a motion?
I'll move approval of the minutes from the board meeting of August 28th as presented.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, ma'am. Any discussion? Anything people noticed? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And the minutes from August 28th are approved. Now we come to the public participation portion of the meeting. If anyone in the audience would like to come up and speak to the board on any issue on the agenda tonight, they may, or any issue in general, please step up. Seeing none, we will move on to the superintendent's report on student achievement, I believe.
Yes, thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Arthur.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to ask Mrs. Julie Smith to join us here at the podium. She is going to present tonight on our student achievement, which is our advanced placement and concurrent enrollment report. We're pretty excited about this. We have some really good data in some areas and some areas to still work on. Also looking at the vision that we cast at the back to school, where we are looking for our entering freshmen to graduate with a high school diploma and another piece of paper. Ms. Smith and I had a great meeting with the high school counselors and Mr. Hamilton on, I believe it was Tuesday afternoon. We were with them. Monday afternoon? Today's Tuesday, right, okay. And Ms. Smith really presented the catalog, and we had some great discussion, and I appreciate the time that we had on that agenda. So Ms. Smith, the floor is yours.
Thank you. As you know, we have a goal about making post-secondary inescapable for our students, and I think that our advanced placement courses and concurrent enrollment courses is one avenue to achieving that, and so that's what we'll be talking about tonight. First, some highlights. You, of course, have all of the data in your board docs from about the past 10 years, but we're just going to share a few of these tonight. The first piece of good news is that we have a 56% pass rate on our AP exams, and that's actually up 3% from last year. It is also actually the highest since 2006, 2007. So that is some really great news with going with that. As well as this past year, we have 18 students who are AP scholars. And to be an AP scholar, as you know, you have to get a level 3 or higher on 3 or more assessments. So that's really quite an accomplishment for these kids, and we have 18 of them. Also, our AP and CE course enrollments increased by 87 enrollments over the previous year. And over the past 5 years, it has increased 465 enrollments. And so we are in a really nice trend, an upward trend moving up about not just the number, but the amount of courses kids are enrolling in for either advanced placement or concurrent enrollment. Another piece of good news about this is we're decreasing the gap between boys and girls taking classes. Last year girls enrolled 295 more times than boys did. This year it's down to about 200 more. So we are decreasing that gap, another piece of good news. So I know one of the things that I was interested in is what do kids enroll in? What are we taking? What is preferred by our students? And so on this particular thing, what I wanted to share was these are classes that have at least 100 enrollments or more in them in this current school year. And so for our advanced placement, the language and composition and biology are the two that are the highest, have the highest enrollments from our students. And for concurrent enrollment, similarly, composition 1 and 2 have very high enrollments. College algebra, public speaking, trigonometry, introduction to engineering, and computer science. And most of these, as you can see, are more on the academic related side with our high enrollments as opposed to the career and technical side at this point. And then I did want to share a little bit about that year 13. It takes 24 credit hours to be considered completing your year 13. So if you were completing like the equivalency of your freshman year of college, you would need 24 credit hours approximately to do so. We can offer kids a maximum of 23. By law, that's what we can offer and help pay for, is that maximum of 23. However, parents do have the option, if students want to get that 24th, to pay that enrollment for that last credit. We offer kids right now 10 advanced placement courses and 33 concurrent enrollment courses, and those are courses that are offered on our campuses, not what they also have access to out on the Iowa Western campus. So those are just in our campuses there.
And there's also courses they can take in Ingenuity online.
Not with there are some, there are two institutes for sure that we partner with. One is the University of Iowa that offers a concurrent enrollment course. And then we also partner with UNMC to offer some, the kids have to be selected, and for that one they attend classes over there. Last year I believe we had 4 students who attended and graduated from that program. But these I was just talking about ones that are just on our campus that they can go with. And the one from UNI, since they take it, I consider that in here because they take it long distance, but at our site. So really next steps that we're looking at, really want to study the impact of concurrent enrollment and with our ECA program. Obviously our goal is to get more kids doing that, not displacing one set of kids for another. So we really want to make sure that we are hitting and still maintaining that high level of kids who are taking concurrent enrollment on our campuses, as well as increasing that number by the students who are going out to Iowa Western. And we want to continue to decrease the gender gap in what's happening with our enrollment with that. So those are the two things we'll really look at concentrating on next year. So that, any questions that I may answer for you?
Are we looking at not just gender, but maybe race and kind of seeing what the gap is related to that?
We have been tracking that with the gaps, and that information is in your board packet.
Okay.
With looking at that, right now it seems that, or at least the way I was looking at it, that gender gap is something we need to look at in a couple different areas, and it's something that we are really becoming aware of in several areas throughout the things. That was the one that just in general we want to look at how we're doing things more equitably with boys and girls.
Okay.
But that information is in your packet, Dr. Argras.
Question on the, looking through this, what's in our packet, advanced placement exam history, and list by school and percentage completed and all that. So it's like, so in 17-18, it said we had 78 test takers at Abraham Lincoln. Total exams were 123. Number 3+ was 79.
So 3+ means that they have to get a score of 3.
Oh, I see, I see, it's not 3
That's the score that
exams.
they have to get in
Okay,
order for
so-
that exam to count as a credit.
79 of the 123 got a 3+. So
That's
79,
the pass rate of
79
56,
tests
yeah,
had a 3 or higher,
yes.
correct? And I look at TJ's and I go, so 22 of their 57 had a 3 or higher. Do we know, are there any discrepancies on the classes that are being taken? Or what it is that AL is doing to prepare their kids better for this test than Thomas Jefferson?
Some of that is due to the fact of the credentials of our teaching staff at the buildings. And so some of those classes are offered at, for example, AL, but are open to TJ kids to come over and take. It's not, the enrollment for that from TJ isn't really high or big because it's just not. It's the travel and they have to go over.
Right.
But there's not a teacher with the credentials to teach it at TJ. And I don't have my sheet right in front of me to think of a specific
I'm
example.
just trying to see why the pass rates are so low, because presuming these are our top kids in general, I think. I mean, is there a preparation we're doing at one school that's different than what we're offering at the other, or what's going on?
No, they have an ACT prep, or, excuse me, wrong thing, sorry. I don't know honestly, I'm not sure of the answer to that.
And I think that's a good piece of data for us to look at, because even in looking at the diversity pass-fail and looking at the schools pass-fail, this information will give us a lot of good information for our new principal to dig into as she looks at this, and she is. But again, I would say, right now, it is the same preparation. Sometimes, when you look at a 3, 4, or 5 on an AP exam, that is not always an easy exam to pass. And so, the one thing I asked Dr. Voigtman and Ms. Smith about was, on an AP exam, teachers have to predict how the students will do. I'd love to see, and we ran this in my prior district, what were the predictions of the teachers to what was the actual score of the students? Because then I will be able to begin to look and see the belief and the training that's taken place. And so we're going to use this data to dig into, because there is, as you can tell, the numbers don't add up the same. So it is something that we have to dig into.
Are there more students at AL total? than there are TJ,
A
or
little
is
bit
it
more,
the
but
same?
not at that great.
Is this enrollment in AP classes? Is that in here? I didn't
This
see
is,
that.
this is the number of students that took the exam.
I'm
not
thinking like
A's.
how many students are taking, if AL has 400 kids taking AP classes, what percentage are taking the test, how are they doing? If TJ has however many,
Yeah.
that we can try to identify where that disparity is, because I hate to see a disparity there at all.
Well, I
I've
have
seen
a-
in the past that some of there were some, I still remember the conversation about statistics, where it was like, this is an AP class, this is a college replacement course, and they weren't really studying,
At that level that you think?
like,
Mhm.
because he never had homework. And I kept thinking, it's probably not gonna do well on the tests, and didn't, and I think just setting that expectation that it's great to do those college classes, but the point of them is to get the credit
Get the credit, right.
and to be challenged, but to put in the work to be prepared for college, so,
Yeah, so that's a piece of data we can dig into, and we can put that in a Friday note for you.
okay.
And then I have the question, so do the students still have to pay for the AP test themselves?
Know the answer.
If you are.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to see if that would have any kind
Yeah,
of
impact.
impact on actual kids taking a test.
And is the cost of 180, Dr. Worthman, do you know?
94,
94.
maybe it was 2, it was 180, that's why,
Okay.
okay.
And then, do we have any idea for like the concurrent enrollment and the AP test, like the actual percentages of these that can transfer over to colleges? Because I know sometimes, especially on like the AP test, like even a 3 is just kind of
Some
thrown
schools
out, they don't take it.
Yeah.
But do we have any idea like what that kind of rate is for us? So that we make sure that the students are actually getting the credit?
One of the things that the counselors work with on the kids to look at concurrent enrollment, transferring to like a four-year college or obviously because our credits from that come through Iowa Western, they would all transfer into Iowa Western's program, but then how they might transfer into a four-year college is one of the things counselors work on with kids when they're looking at what are your future, what are you doing? So you may not want to take culinary if you're going to go to Iowa State and go into business. That might not be something that transfers over, even though it's from an accredited, it won't transfer to your program. They're really good about steering kids on what do you really need for your next level. So right, not all things are equal, but if they, like, for example, Comp 1 and 2 that were up there, those are going to transfer to a university because they're a university, they're a college credit from an accredited university.
And if I recall in past discussions with Corey, we've really kind of focused on the state schools like Iowa, Iowa State, UNI, and those have been congruent with the curriculum that they were teaching in those courses, and so we knew that they would transfer there because
Right.
most of our students are picking one of those universities. They don't, it depends on what the university accepts outside of that, so.
And again, I can't say enough good things about the counselors and how they guide kids with those types of decisions that,
Yep.
you know, when might you take the AP course for the composition versus a concurrent course might very well depend on what you want to do when you graduate from high school.
You mentioned earlier that we had an increase of 87 enrollments. Is that head count or
No, that's enrollments in
courses?
classes, right.
Enrollments in class, so it's duplicated. Well, I think we should be proud of all the options that we're offering kids.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm curious to know, what we offered 33 concurrent enrollment courses. Curious to know how that might compare to other UEN schools, and maybe, we have the number and percent of overall students that earn some sort of college credit, but average, how many credits are those students how many credits are those students turning out with when they graduate?
That's a good point.
Because we offer a lot of great options, and I'm assuming compared to a lot of other schools, we are investing more, maybe a lot more than in making those opportunities available. Be able to quantify, the average student that earns college credit is graduating with X number of college credits and what that means in terms of cost savings and for
Yeah,
them.
I
and
think we should tie a dollar amount to it too, to really show the bang for the buck.
I'm not
Haven't we
trying
done
to
that in the
create extra
past?
work
Yeah.
for all of you in the
Yeah,
reporting,
we've done
but
that
I'm
before.
just more curious than anything, so.
Remember Corey having a,
Well, I think when we
Several
look
hundred
at that,
thousand
when we
dollar
talk about the
report.
goal about making post-secondary inescapable, we are going to start looking at more things. This is just one small piece
Right,
of that.
yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right in the way we look and track and do that, and we'll want to do it as part of reaching that goal.
It's a great selling point for our districts,
Absolutely.
I do think though, you're correct about looking at our minority students, our poverty students, seeing how many take advantage of this, our students who, can benefit a lot of times from some programs, things the best. Are we really engaging them, so?
And having a conversation around how do we supplement for those students that can't afford to take the assessment? Because enrollment may match when we pull it or be
Sure.
pretty close, but it's parents being able to afford to purchase the assessment.
Well, and if they're on a waiver,
Yeah,
the test is
it should
waived.
be,
I think that's what I
I would
thought.
thought.
We
It is.
pay that, don't we?
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. it's
So we'll
waived,
see.
So,
Yeah, we will dig into that and put it in Friday
And
notes.
Friday notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Now we move to informational presentations.
Yes. At this time, Mr. Wilson's going to join us at the podium to go through our treasurer's report. And we've spent a great deal of time around this report. I think the board will be very interested as Mr. Wilson walks us through. So, Mr. Wilson, as soon as you cast. We did it last year. Did a comparison.
The office. Reporter. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Murillo. This is the annual treasurer's report where we report basically on what happened for the year. So the financial results that I'm going to present tonight are before the external audit and are subject to change between now and the conclusion of the audit. There was one change I actually made today that will modify the numbers a little bit. And the other thing I wanted to point out is the relationship among these different terms you hear, spending authority and solvency ratio and surpluses, deficits, cash balances. Sometimes they're difficult to conceptualize under Iowa finance law, as we've talked about that in the past. One thing I do want to say, when I talk about a surplus or a deficit, that is the operational results between July of 17 and June of 18. So if we say it had a deficit or a surplus, it only has to do with that period of time. Okay. So we're going to present on some funds tonight, as you can read up there for yourselves. And each one of these funds by Iowa law has a certain purpose. And sometimes I think what community members may not quite realize is that because of the purpose of these funds, we can only spend the money for that intended purpose. So just because you have X many dollars in one fund, that doesn't mean you can automatically use it for something else. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So this is the general fund. And the general fund is where most of our educational expenditures are paid from, such as our teachers and the support that they have in terms of staff, people in this office, wages and benefits for that group, instructional supplies, utilities, transportation, purchase services. But we never pay for infrastructure out of here, so we can't use any of this money to go build buildings or to remodel buildings. That is prohibited by Iowa law. Currently, what we're showing is the 17-18 year had a slight deficit of about $66,000. We had budgeted a surplus of about $22,000, so we're pretty close to that number. At the end of the year, on June 30th, that cash balance was about $21.5 million. And I don't have a special education deficit number for you tonight, although I'll have it by the end of the week. We're still tweaking that. We were tweaking it today, so I'll have that for you later in the week. The general fund, we estimate that our spending authority will be about 9.4%, and the spending authority, as you may recall, is the most important metric that we use to determine the financial health of the district. Target is 8 to 10%, so we're in a good spot right there. Solvency ratio, that's basically the ratio of did you have a surplus or a deficit combined throughout the existence of the district. They wanted they wanted between 5 and 10%, and we're going to be around 8.7 or so. That number may go up or down a little bit, but it's pretty close to that number. This is the general fund cash balance as of the last 11 years. You will note that in the 09-10 year, you had a big drop there. That was the year that the state had the 10% across the board cut, and we had to use a lot of our cash. We had a big loss in that year. What we're trying to do is to stabilize that cash within a certain range. I had told you that in the past few years, we've seen our reserves drop. They did go up a little bit last year based on some of the changes that we made. So I think that our cash position currently, at least as of June 30th, for the general fund is in a good spot for us to move forward.
You know, there's some big expenditures yet to hit. Is that what it is? It was,
So the 66,000 I mentioned was the deficit. That's all the revenue and expenditures that we've recorded for the year.
okay, so
There should be nothing more out there.
we've done a better job at cost cutting and probably had some more revenues come in, or how's that? I feel like before we were talking more bleak.
We had budgeted basically a break-even budget, about 22,000. We had a $66,000 loss. We're trying to match our revenues with our expenses to make it about break-even. Sometimes the board may decide that in a year, for a specific reason, they may want to have a larger loss. We do have the spending authority to do that. But for right now, we try to match revenues and expenses to basically break even.
Okay.
So if the board will remember, last year, we knew with the enrollment drop that we needed to look at our budget and try to come out with a balanced budget. And we had the $2.5 million deficit that we were working on. And I believe because as a district, we came together and found ways to cut some areas and some costs, that's how we were able to come out at the end where we did. If we had not done that, we would have been, not at the area that we're at right now, or the level.
Dean, the range, the cash balance range that you're trying to stay within, does that represent something in terms of
So-
operational costs, or?
Yeah, so during the months of July and August, we do not get any state aid payments. Last year, we were getting about $6.8 million per month for state aid payments. So we have to cash flow payroll during July and August. And that cash balance really drops way, way down. If we didn't have enough cash on hand, we literally would have to go borrow money on a line of credit to make payroll until we got state aid money back. So I don't want to do that, and I don't want to incur district resources for interest. So we try to keep that cash so that we do have enough money on hand.
So that range represents a certain number of months of
Right.
operational costs.
Operational costs, correct. This graph is the last 5 years of comparing revenues and expenses together. You'll notice in the 14-15 and the 15-16 year, our expenses exceeded our revenues. And we had a cash drop in the years after that because we using cash to pay for those expenses. But since we've leveled out and we try to match our expenditures and our revenues, our cash balance is stabilizing right now. So the next fund we want to talk about is the management fund. And the management fund, the revenues are from property taxes, and the expenditures are property and liability insurance, worker comp premiums, and early retirement costs. And this is mandated by state law. We have to record these here. The fund had a deficit of about $345,000 due to the early retirement programs in 15-16 and 16-17. That number I expect to drop next year in terms of the cost that we're paying out because we'll be life cycling those costs out as we go on here. Cash balance was a healthy roughly $2.45 million at June 30th.
Our work comp premiums have gone down, correct?
Our work comp premiums have reduced, right. And our property and liability insurance premiums have also stabilized as well. This is the SAVE fund. So the revenue is from the state sales tax collections. Last year was about $8.7 million. The expenditures are transfers. We transfer money from this fund over to the debt service fund to make our principal and interest payments. Last year that was about $6.4 million. We also pay construction and equipment costs out of this fund. We had a deficit of $953,000 in this fund, which we thought we would have due to the stadium project, finishing that up, new software initiatives, and the educational equipment that we purchased in this fund. Cash balance again was a healthy $4.1 million at the end of June. The property, plant, and equipment levy, PPEL fund, revenue is property taxes and sale of buildings if we had any. Construction costs, leases, and equipment costs are the major expenditures for this. We had a surplus of about $335,000 in the fund and cash at almost just shy of $2.5 million at 6/30. We use this fund a lot to do a lot of kind of quasi-major repairs. If a HVAC system goes out, if we need to buy heat pumps, if we have to install a ramp or something, this is the fund where we use that for. The stadium fund, this was a fund that we had set up just to track the revenues and the costs for the stadium project. This fund is now closed, and we are done with the stadium, thankfully, and moving forward. The debt service fund, revenues, property taxes, interest incomes, and then the big one is the transfer from the SAVE fund, also called Silo Fund. Expenditures are essentially principal and interest payments. We had a deficit of $2.46 million in this fund. And the reason is that we had reserves that we had on our balance sheet that we used to pay down the bonds. We refinanced them. And when we use those cash reserves, we have to record that as an expense. That was about $1.6 million, and then we had about another $150,000 of issuance costs from legal fees and things like that. So really, if you take that out of there, we had a deficit of about $600,000. And as the fund is starting to mature, we're putting more money into reserves, which means that we have more expenditures on our books unless we record as revenues, and that's why we're recording losses now. So this is a combination of the management, PPEL fund, capital projects, and the debt service fund, revenues and expenses. So our expenses, as you see, exceeded our revenues in this year primarily because of that debt service fund. It just kind of depends what's going on for the year. I expect the GO bond to pass tonight, and if it does, we should see an increase when we take out an issuance of revenues coming in. And then as the years go by, you start seeing that money being spent. So the revenues may be in one year, but the expenditures could be in another year. The nutrition fund, this is revenues from federal and state grants, sale of the food, lunch and breakfast. And of course, the costs are the costs related to running the school lunch program. Fund had a deficit of $236,000. So you may remember when Brian Green was here from Simon Johnson, he talked about that IPERS liability we have to put on our books, our portion of the IPERS liability. Well, this fund has to absorb their own, and that was about $85,000 of the $236,000. So it had a little loss of about $150,000. We budgeted a loss of $114,000, a little higher than anticipated. But our cash balance of $2 million is healthy, and our fund balance in that fund is very good as well.
Is this the first time we've been in a deficit in the
No, we had a
nutrition fund?
deficit last year, slight one again.
Is it worse this year?
Slightly, but about the same.
We used to have deficits that were,
10 years ago, we had.
yeah, 800,000 or
had
9.
Close to $1 million.
And
But I thought
many
for a
school-
while it was in
It
the
was growing,
green.
well, when we started doing the kind of free
Right,
CEP.
food different schools, it
Right.
changed some of that. We had to incur some costs.
okay.
Many school districts around Iowa really have a time with this fund because it's essentially the way the state expects you to run this is as a business. It's called a proprietary fund, and they're just incurring huge losses. But we've been fortunate that with Lisa and Virginia before, they've done a very good job of managing this fund. So I'll show you something here in a minute, but to your point, there have been some surpluses, 13-14 through 15-16, with a slight deficit in 16-17 and a slight deficit again in 17-18. The thing about the 16-17 and the 17-18, what's included in there is that liability for IPER, so it's kind of throwing it off a little bit. It was not before that.
Because you didn't have to show it at all.
So this was the cash balance, and this goes all the way back to 07, 08. You can see actually it was in the negative because of the losses that Troy and Dave were talking about. And since then, our cash balances are healthy right now in that fund. The health insurance fund, these are premiums paid by the district and employees, and also reinsurance premiums. So if a claim goes over $175,000, we get reinsurance money for that back. The expenditures are the health claims, reinsurance premiums, and health savings accounts payments. After using $753,000 for a health insurance premium holiday, the fund ended up having a surplus of $858,000.
Wow. And this includes the recent changes that we've made?
This was before, because those changes take effect July 1.
Got it, okay.
Cash balance is again healthy, $7.35 million in that fund. The auditors are scheduled to be here next week for 2 glorious weeks.
Wow.
Which I'll get to work with them. And the certified annual report is due next Monday. We'll have that filed by the end of the week, along with the special education report and the transportation report. So is there any questions that you may have tonight?
I asked him as it went
Yeah,
along,
this
so I'm
money was
good.
going.
One thing that I asked Dean to talk about is that we may not see ourselves as a wealthy district, and I don't know if it was the state of Iowa or someone else that put out the whole map.
IASB did.
ISB. And it showed that we were one of the districts that have the lowest.
Valuation per pupil.
But I would tell you that one thing that I've charged Dean with is ensuring we are a stable district and that we live within our means and we don't overspend. And I think he's doing a really good job of ensuring that that happens, because we may not be a wealthy district, but we certainly can be a stable district and be good stewards of the funds that we do have and that we use them wisely. So that's what we will continue to do, and I'm really pleased to see that we have some reserves and we have where we're at, because we are on the high end of the reserves. We're at 9 point something, and it's between 5 to 10%. But it also protects us in case we ever have something happen. I want to make sure that if something ever happened to me, I have enough in the savings to take care of me. And so that's the same thing for our district.
Yeah, I do think, though, that we, when you're looking at other districts, when you're at the convention in November and you see districts that are 20% cash and all these other crazy things, and it's like they aren't spending their money for the betterment of their district, of their students. I think we put a lot of things in place to try to do that. I do think I'd like to bring up that, that kind of dental insurance thing as a concept when we're doing really well with our health insurance fund, on how we do that in conversation.
I
Sometime
definitely
next
can,
year.
I will revisit that.
Pleased to see the nutrition fund now. Do we feel that long-term projection, this continues to winnow down to 150, 60,000 a year until we're back down 10 years from now? I mean, I think the things that we put in place with the free school lunches were phenomenal. I know as we keep evaluating that program, but do we feel that this is a sign that maybe we've overstepped a little bit and we'll run 10 years out and then go, this doesn't quite work as well?
So this is something we need to evaluate on an annual basis, and I'm definitely going to be sitting down with Lisa and going over the budget to see what we can do to make sure that we can at least break even. We don't need to have a surplus every year, but
Right.
again, the deficit is small right now and we can absorb it. We don't want to make a habit of it.
Right,
But
well,
at the same time, our goal is to at least break even on the deal.
And the other, well, the cash balance is, certainly nice.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure we're thinking that out, so, very good. Very good.
I think so too. I was really appreciative of the areas where we have some cash balances left, where we're thinking about our facility, our maintenance,
Mhm.
knowing that we have a means to ensure that our buildings stay where they should be. That's really positive to have.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And so at this time, we will invite Dr. Corey Vorthman to the podium to talk about our comprehensive school improvement plan. He is going to do a pretty high level. This is required by the state. All of you are invited next week to be here at 5:30 for our speed data consults. I'm kind of making up a name here as we go.
Be dataing.
Okay, all right, speed daddying. It almost sounds like daddy, right?
Speed dating.
Speed dating.
Dating.
So we will meet our compliance tonight so that we can submit our report to the state. And then next week, we'll take you a deeper dive building by building.
Okay.
So Dr. Vorthman?
Great, well, it's my pleasure to be the shortest presentation of the night for once. I have 4
Nice.
slides. First, I just wanted to give you a brief overview. Like Dr. Murillo said, this is one of the state requirements that we certify with the state every year, our annual goals and targets. And the Comprehensive School Improvement Plan process basically tells school districts from the Department of Ed that they need to look at their data regularly, they need to make decisions based on their data and set goals and monitor them, which is our process anyway, but we're happy to comply with the state's request. And so every school district in the state does this, and it is due on Friday. So our goals are no surprise to you. They come from both the conversation that we had at our last month's board meeting, which was very informative. It helped craft the goals that you're about to see, as well as the superintendent's goals, take into consideration the goals and the objectives that are in the strategic plan, as well as individual building school improvement plans, which you'll be hearing about at our next board meeting, and the objectives that we put forth in the 2017-2020 academic plan. So the state requires us to, we can have as many goals as we want, but we are required to have a short and a long-range goal on early literacy. That's required of all school districts in the state of Iowa. And then you can add as many school goals as you want. So on Friday, we plan to use these 3 goals, which they will look very familiar, because goal 3 is one that you approved on our last board meeting. It's one of the superintendent's goals, which means it's one of my goals. So we'll start at the very top. Our short-term goal is that 67% of our students will meet benchmark on the FAST test. That's a required goal by the state. We can choose any number we want, but it comes right out of the academic plan. The long-term goal is the 2020 goal, which is 71% of our students will meet benchmark on FAST by 2020. That's our long-term goal for FAST. That also comes right out of the academic plan. And then lastly, the one that you approved at our last board meeting is 80% of our students hitting that average, high average, and high level on math and reading on the MAP test. So with your blessing, we would like to submit these to the state of Iowa as the goals that we'll work towards for the Council Bluffs Community School District in the 2018-19 school year. And with that, I would welcome your questions. I feel like we kind of had this discussion
Yeah, I
a
think we
month
had
ago,
this discussion.
so, but if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
And we'll approve this next time?
Pardon me?
We're approving this next time? You're saying with our blessing?
No,
Did
we
we
have to
talk about this
inform
before?
you of this, and if there are any
Okay.
concerns that you have, I would be happy to go back and rework those
Gotcha.
goals. But
So,
that's why we had the conversation at the
not
last month's
poo-pooing
meeting,
these
so,
goals.
yeah.
Anyways, not pooping the goals, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
This is a compliance, a
Compliance.
checkbox.
Check it off. yeah.
There we go.
It's the way that we do business anyway, so,
Any questions?
thank you.
Very good, thanks, sir. Quite possibly one of the fastest meetings. Oh, yeah, so there's something on here, board work session summary, and I guess it's in black there. So the board met a little earlier. And we went through kind of what the next steps might be if the bond election is successful, and what those steps might be if it fails. And kind of what that timeline might look for us for the kind of engagement within the district and with the community. And we're excited, I think, to thinking positively. We have a great plan if this thing passes that involves just a lot of positive momentum and energy in the district that I think will energize the community. And if we're unsuccessful and voters say no, there's a couple different options we're going to consider to rethink this issue and try to move forward in some way where we address the concerns at our schools. Where there's some immediate heating and air. What was the other concern? There was an immediate concern with the chiller issue. And there's several different issues that we need to address that we'll have to find other routes for. It's good to know the district is healthy in other regards. So we'll have some limited capacity to do those things. But the district, the board, takes it very seriously and is looking at kind of both options and how we might move forward. So we are hoping for the best and look forward to seeing positive news tonight. And we are adjourned.